questions, so feel free to use that time as well. But we'll be paying attention to the raise hand feature and the chat box both as we go along.
All right, I think we're working. Does everyone see this slide, this title slide all right? Good, excellent. I see nods.
Yep.
So let me welcome you all. Sorry that took 4 or 5 minutes, but that's all right. So I'm Craig Norberg-Bohm, co-chairperson of the North American Men Engaged Network. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be hosting you today. This is a community of practice that the NAMEN, as we call it, likes to offer, which is a space we hope is safe, primarily for leaders and educators to share their experience, best practices, and hopes and dreams for the future and learn together. So welcome. NAMEN is a chapter of the Global Men Engaged Alliance, which is an international alliance of NGOs working together to promote gender equality for men and boys. You can learn more at menengaged.org. Feel free to research it. 6 regional networks operating in 70 countries. And we are a Canadian and United States North American chapter. There's a chapter for south of the US border, Mexico and Central America tend to collaborate. And there are chapters in Europe and other parts of the world. And we'll talk a little bit about that today because folks in the room today may well be from other parts of the Men Engaged Alliance, which we'll find out shortly. A few words of introduction about the process. We have 17 folks registered. We have 33 lines open right now, which means there may well be more than 17 people with us. I don't know, but some participants might have 2 lines, which is a phone call and video. That would be count as 2. So we'll see. Toby is doing his best to keep track of who's in the room today. So let him know you're here if you haven't said hello in chat yet. He's keeping a list. And we're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves shortly because we're a small enough group to be able to do that today. So there is a raise your hand feature you can find in the participants box, bottom of your screen. You might try that. Feel free to practice with it now. It's a toggle. You can turn it on and turn it off. And that'll help us call on you later for conversation. Toby will be happy to help with that.
Can't wait.
Yeah, Toby?
I just said, can't wait.
Oh, can't wait, right. And we are recording today, so you all remember that. Basic ground rules, mute your line as a rule. That way we won't have background noise. Say your name when you speak. Use the principle of step up, step back to allow all voices. If you've spoken a bunch, step back. If you haven't spoken much and wish to, please step up. All questions are good questions, and please use the chat feature freely. That's recorded also, by the way, so for posterity. So a brief about our full spring series. I'll say a word about this. There are 4 sessions in this series, all focusing on men supporting Me Too, taking action to the next level. The first one today is sharing our community experience. How are we finding men responding? What are our excitements and opportunities, and what are our frustrations? We'll do that today. In 2 weeks, we'll talk about dialogues on theories of change for men. What are we attempting to accomplish? What's our trajectory to accomplish what and how? Then we're going to have a session on immediate applications. What can we do now? And we have a couple of presenters talking about some practical programs they're implementing that are working well for them. And we will look forward to hearing participants' stories as well in that to share concrete ways to respond to the Me Too movement. Then finally, in June, we're going to meet to reflect on lessons learned, talking exclusively about what participants' takeaways are and what you're doing in your localities and chatting about that and talking about giving kind of a mutual consulting session on local work. And we're happy to offer an ongoing discussion group from this spring series if there's interest. So we'll get there, do that if we get to it. So what are our goals for this whole process? To address these issues brought up by men by the Me Too movement, share concepts and concrete examples that can be used in response, focus on strategies that can take efforts to the next level, try to define what the next level might mean for you. Next levels are different for each community and culture. We like to take an intersectional view. that I'm not pretending that what I have to say will work for every community, culture, race, or gender identity. I think those things are meaningful, locations are very meaningful, and I'm very respectful of that reality. So, you know, my white perspective in the United States, in the Northeast United States, has a certain culture connected to it. And I simply own that, and I invite to hear and learn about other cultures and perspectives and how this works. But we think there's a next step and next level for all of us. One of those is policy and political action. And we're looking forward to learning about how we move there. And of course, we will encourage a facilitated ongoing practice community if folks would like to. So that's our objectives. Today's subject is, I like how I spell experience. The P is an O. But that is of men and Me Too. What are we finding to be men's response to Me Too? Today we'll share experiences and consider our current and cultural critical questions. What does it look like, might it look like to take action to the next level? What has been our experience and what opportunity does this lead to? I just want to say by way of introduction that in Voicemail Magazine, which we suggested everyone take a look at before this session, that a recent MTV conducted research, the cable, you know, MTV Music News, among 1,800 young people, 18 to 25, with some encouraging results. 1 in 3 young men are concerned that they have done something wrong in the past. 40% of young men are admitting to changing their behavior because of Me Too. And 59% of young people, female identified as well as male identified, are thinking more now about how difficult the world is for women. So it's a meaningful, powerful movement. That's what we're here to talk about. So we're gonna have 2 short presentations of experience, which we'll introduce those folks in a moment, followed by general discussion and Q&A. But before we do that, and because we're gonna be together for 4 sessions, we thought we'd take a little bit more time today than we would in the future for introductions. So we're gonna take 15 or 20 minutes now to introduce ourselves, see who's in the room. We'll go around and we'll call your name. I think Toby has a list with him about people who signed up. And one thought is that we could put that list up and share your screen, and it just has people's cities and states, not any other contact information. And we'll just go down the list and introduce ourselves. Does that sound like a good idea, Toby?
Yeah, sure. Could do.
Okay, I'll stop sharing right now. Here we go. You go ahead and share your screen, and we'll do introductions.
Okay. Henrik, you have the great honor of being first on the list. Feel comfortable unmuting yourself and just saying hi to everybody?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, great, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Henrik, and I work for the Swedish organization NAMEN. And I'm actually pretty new in the organization. Well, I started as a volunteer 7 years ago and but I've just been employed for a couple of months because we had, Me Too has been super big in Sweden. So we got lots of interest from different organizations and companies that wanted us to come out and talk about masculinity norms.
That's great.
So I've been put together a sort of like a conversation guide after Me Too that we spread, that we've been trying out. And also I'm doing some work in organizations now, preventing sexual harassment.
Awesome. Thanks, Henrik.
Thank you.
Sounds like awesome work and a beautiful model for what a great introduction is.
Thank you.
Vidar, are you here? You mind going next?
Hey, hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm also working with men in Sweden and together with Henrik. And in the article in the voicemail, there is also on page 22, there is an article about our work. And I think there it says like 100 men contacted men as an organization when as a response to Me Too. But in fact, we got 1,000 new members in 2 weeks during Me Too. So it was a huge response, and we wanted to meet that big response and
Amazing.
request for a lot of men who wanted to do something.
That's great.
And we started these conversations groups, which is very much, in fact, listening groups and reflection groups. And so it started up all over Sweden. I have the honor to have now my third group, and it's beautiful, beautiful to have these safe spaces with men who are really wanting to reflect on themselves and also wanting to do something.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Tony, are you with us? And Craig, do you mind checking out that chat thing while I do this?
Oh, sure.
All right, Tony, we'll come back to you if you're there.
Yep. She may not be
Ross, are you here?
I saw Ross's face.
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
Also, Tony said something on chat that they don't have a working mic, so she's introducing herself on
chat?
on the chat there.
Thanks.
Great.
Yeah. My name is Ross Steinborn. I'm in the North Shore, Massachusetts, so in the Salem, Massachusetts area. And I work at a rape crisis center here. And we mostly do consent education work, so not a focus directly on men, but men and young men are in our consent education workshops a lot. And so trying to talk about consent and about boundaries and respecting boundaries in sexual situations with co-ed classrooms, one in which engages men, is something that I'm very passionate about.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. Mm-hmm. And thanks for helping explain what happened to Tony. Sorry about that, Tony. Tom, you out there somewhere?
I am.
What up, Tom?
Hi, how are y'all? I'm Tom Schiff. I run an organization called Fallacies. Fallacies is a men's health dialogue and theater program. Do training, consulting, curriculum development, and performance based on dialogue with men. Currently doing a number of different programs in local schools, including a middle school group. And we're going to be hopefully the plan is to develop a podcast about what it means to be a young man in that school. And if you hear some growling, it's because my dog is trying to get me to play with him. Stop. And one of the things I'm curious about, I haven't seen anything locally. I'm in Western Massachusetts. I haven't seen anything that's any kind of local response, and we have actually a good number of people. Like voicemail is from Western Massachusetts, and Men's Resource Internet. I guess it's now called Merge for Equality. So we've been having some conversation, but there hasn't been anything that's really happened in a broader scale. Also, as far as work that we're doing is trying to create some performance pieces and perhaps videos for use around some of the pushing back against the pushback around Me Too. The idea that what am I supposed to do now in the workplace? I don't even know how to be in the workplace. Sort of that kind of pushback, I guess, for lack of a better word right now, versus, well, if you don't know how to be in the workplace, maybe you shouldn't be there, or maybe you need to rethink how you are there. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now. I'm excited to hear what people are doing and connecting with everybody.
Thanks so much, Tom. That's great. Jamal, you with us? Jamal in Arizona. So again, Craig, if you don't mind, whatever's happening in chat, because it's not open on mine, we'll move on to Umberto and then potentially come back to Jamal.
Yeah, I'll check chat.
Umberto, are you with us from White Ribbon, Toronto?
Yes, I'm here, and I apologize. I just joined.
Oh, hi, welcome.
So thank you.
It's perfect time.
Nice to be with all of you, but I missed a question. So
it's a really in-depth one around, will you just introduce yourself in a slightly brief but nice way to the group?
Okay, sure. So
Thanks.
Umberto Carollo, Executive Director of White Ribbon, based in Toronto, Canada, and also co-chair of the of NAMEN, the North American Men Engaged Network. I also sit on the board of directors of the Global Men Engaged Alliance, and I'm really happy to be here with you today and look forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. TK, you out there and able to unmute and say hey?
I am, yes. Thank
Hello.
you. Hi. Yeah, my name is TK Pritchard. I'm the Male Allies Program Educator for the Male Allies Program at the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region. So we do work engaging men and boys in this conversation. We've been doing it for about 10 years. And I teach within school systems and high schools. I'm contracted with the local university, as well as we train OHL hockey players and athletes at the minor level. I'm particularly interested because we do a lot of this work. However, Me Too has engaged a lot of men in the conversation who have not openly come to some of our work, and I've seen a significant rise in the number of people who would like to be involved. And so I'm developing more strategies for kind of bringing those folks in, and I'm interested to hear how others are doing on it.
Ooh, awesome. Thanks for that. Amanda, you mind saying hey quick? Give Amanda a couple more seconds to figure out if keyboards are working and such to unmute. All right, so Amanda and Jamal, you're on the list. We'll come back to you just in case. In the meantime, is Elizabeth here from Charlottesville?
Amanda said her microphone's not working.
Great. Thanks for explaining that. All right, so if there's no Elizabeth, Stephen, I think you're with us on, oh, maybe you said you don't have a microphone either, if I remember from earlier. So we're moving on to Tom.
Well, wait a moment.
Dun, dun,
Stephen
dun.
take a look at chat, and Stephen has entered a paragraph.
Oh, do you mind reading it?
Sure. Hi, I'm Stephen. I work at the YWCA West Central Michigan, located in Grand Rapids. Prevention specialist that goes into middle, high school, and alternative education classes, co-ed classes, teaching healthy relationship classes to prevent SVDA, as well as teaching sexual health to middle, high school, and community members with IDD. I'm not sure what IDD is. Do you know? Additionally, I am currently in the process of creating community.
All right. Thanks so much, Craig. Tom from New Brunswick, are you with us yet?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Tom.
Hi there. I'm coming to you live actually from Sydney in Australia.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, it's a real honor to be here, and I'm really excited from what I've heard so far. Here in Sweden, it's amazing to hear that your group's been going so well, and I'd love to hear more, because I'm just the embryonic stages of starting up a group here in Sydney with another couple of men, and it seems there's not a lot going on locally here, so I'm really excited to just listen and learn here today. And I think in the spirit of transparency and honesty with you all, I'm also a man who's spoken publicly about his own sexual misconduct. So I'm here today to see whether there's a potential or a validity in speaking with other men as someone myself who has such a past. But it's a real privilege to be here. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yo, Tom, thanks so much for saying hi and being here and sharing some of that vulnerability. Super appreciate it. Emiliano, are you with us now? I don't remember seeing your name on the list earlier. All right, moving on to Dustin in Kansas. You able to sign on, Dustin?
Hi, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Awesome. Hey folks, my name is Dustin. I am a prevention educator at the University of Kansas in lovely Lawrence, Kansas. I've been working at the institution for about 6 years, but when our new Sexual Assault Prevention Education Center opened in 2016, I joined the team as a prevention educator focused on bystander intervention and men's engagement. I predominantly do our men's engagement work with our ROTC, our social fraternities on campus, and then with our Division I student athletes. And that has culminated in the last year into doing 8-week men's engagement programs with some of our selected men's athletics teams. And so luckily been able to partner with some faculty on campus to do some research around that. And we're really excited about eventually being able to share some of the outcomes from what we found from this experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin. Nagar, are you with us? Nagar going once, twice, and moving on to Che from Promundo US. Out there, Che. All right. Craig, I can't hear anything you say, but I can see your face moving. I'm going to stop sharing now. Ooh, sorry, Dustin. Face is there. Hey, Craig, still can't hear you.
If I may, this is Russ.
Hi, Russ.
And Jamal just texted in from the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. So, Jamal, I don't know if you're available to introduce yourself live, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about you and who you are.
So Jamal, if you do want to play along, you just hit the unmute button on your microphone.
So, hi, actually, there's over here.
Hey.
The Coalition to End Sexual Violence. I'm the Sexual Violence Prevention Coordinator for the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. So, we have a vested interest and invested stake in learning more about kind of reactions to as well as hashtag Time's Up and just not only the prevention, but also the addressing and elimination of sexual violence.
Thanks, Jamal.
I'm going to go back to my mute.
Fair enough. We had one other person, potentially more, but Amanda, I know we called on you. Something must have happened, but I see your description in the chat, but it didn't get read out, so I don't want to leave you out of it. So Amanda is a prevention specialist in Sitka, Alaska. Her organization recently did a community readiness assessment on men's willingness to engage in violence prevention, and the readiness level was extremely low. Womp womp. The suggested actions all revolve around the communications. So I'm running focus groups with men in the community in order to create campaigns that will engage men and increase the number of male supporters of the organization and the work that they're up to. So that's amazing, Amanda. So glad to hear about it. Cool. So again, if you didn't get a chance to chime in, feel free to jump into the chat box and do that. Otherwise, let's get started. Russ Laxman, I'm not sure who is going to speak first or what Craig had planned for your intro, but his system just went down, so he logged off. One of y'all want to take it away, or we could have an epic rock, paper, scissors match on camera. Decide who goes first. Russ, I see you're unmuted. Go for it.
Yes, hi. We talked earlier and agreed that I would start that off our presentations.
Hey, Ross.
Hey, Chuck.
Can I just introduce myself quick?
Yes, please do.
Yes,
Sorry,
please.
Sorry, that's okay. Chuck Derry. I'm from Gender Violence Institute in Clearwater, Minnesota, and I've been doing this work since '83. Part of the NAMEN steering committee, and also was on the Global Men Engaged board for about 6 years. Done a lot of work on domestic violence interventions, working with communities, criminal justice system, protocol development, and collaborations. A lot of work on engaging men and primary prevention. Founded the Minnesota Men's Action Network, statewide network of men involved in primary prevention. I'm currently initiating a project in Minnesota to get the Nordic model initiated around prostitution, and I've done other kind of initiatives primary prevention, dealing with athletics, and dealing with policies, divestiture policies related to sexual exploitation, those kinds of things. Thanks.
And Laxman, can we hear you as well?
Thanks. Yeah, Laxman, want to say hi quick?
Hi, hello. Probably I'm speculating there are a few more colleagues who haven't really introduced. So hello to start, I'm Laxman. I work at the Global Secretariat of Men Engaged. I originally come from Nepal, but currently live in the US. And I'll be talking more as we move on.
That's great.
Thanks, Laxman.
Toby, can you hear me?
Yep, working now.
Oh, good. My voice is back. I was nice.
Is there anyone else that we missed that wants to take a moment and chime in? Feel free to unmute yourself. We'll count down from 10 in my head. 6, 5. All right. Again, feel free to use the chat box all the time. I'll be paying attention to that. Otherwise, take it away, Craig and Russ.
All right, great. I think our next step is simply to begin this conversation in some depth. I'm going to call on Russ first. He's a consultant and author in Louisville, Kentucky, and he's going to talk to us about some of his experiences. So Russ, why don't you just take it away? Are you all set?
Okay, sorry, I couldn't get my cursor to work. Hi, y'all. Very excited to be here with you and to have this conversation. So, as Craig said, I'm a consultant and author. I don't so much define as an author, but I'm a consultant based in Louisville, Kentucky. Been doing grassroots community-based organizing for a number of years, both here in Louisville and around the country. And kind of our response to the Me Too movement locally was some conversations that started last fall, some kind of sort of based around the notion that one of the messages from the Me Too movement was that sexual harassment, sexual violence, sexual assault is actually a normative experience for women. It's normal. And that started us having conversations of that, well, if it's normal for women and men are part of the same community, then it kind of has to be normal for men too. And what does that mean for us if our harassing behaviors are in fact normal? And starting to do some work to shift the conversation from men who harass, men who assault being somewhat unnormal to the fact that they are in fact normal. And what does that mean in terms of how we do what we do? That led to us having a first step was organizing a men's panel that we did in March of men responding to the Me Too movement. We were able to get a city council member, a school board member. We had a Southern Baptist minister who is also the dean of students of a seminary here locally. We had a Title IX coordinator from a different university, and then a theology professor. The context here in Louisville is we are, the metro area is about 82% white based on the latest census. And that being said, we wanted to make sure we had a fairly representative, fairly mixed race panel. So we had, it was majority white, but we also had an African-American and an Asian man who were on the panel. Leading up to it, we actually had to move the location twice because of the size. We had a bigger interest than we had expected. And then the night of, fewer people showed up than had indicated interest. So, there you go. But it was a very rich conversation. We ran over in terms of the conversation. It was mostly women who showed up, which is probably not a surprise. It was not a surprise to us. But a very, very detailed conversation. It was never the intention for us to do a one-off men's panel, yay us. Kind of thing. I, as an organizer and as an activist, I'm pretty skeptical of one-off type presentations. I'm not sure what the effect is. So we were doing this thinking that it might lead to a model of having other panel discussions for other kind of subsectors of subcommunities within Metro Louisville. But as we got closer to the panel, the idea emerged that rather than having more panels, which might still happen, what might be more fruitful and what we're currently doing is having community conversations. Sounds like maybe similar, Amanda, to what you're doing around the focus groups, having conversations around Louisville around what is men's role in preventing sexual harassment, sexual violence in Louisville. That is with men, that is with women, it is with mixed gender conversations. We are collecting that data. We're also going to be collecting some resources and some materials from the Global Men Engaged Alliance and what other folks are telling us about what is men's role in stopping this, in preventing this. And then that will be a report that we're going to release hopefully by the end of the year. Parallel to that, there's now started an effort to also create a comprehensive prevention plan for Metro Louisville for preventing sexual violence by the year 2025, which also we're hoping to also release late winter, early spring, late winter 2018, early spring 2019. And the conversation around what is men's role, we intend to embed very much in that broader strategic plan, that broader report. So the panel discussion has led to some really exciting opportunities, I think. The other kind of thing that emerged from this effort has been, we are in the very early stages of a mayoral race for Metro Louisville. And for those of you who don't know, we are the 17th largest city in the country. Somebody counts that, I guess, but there you have it. And one of our main candidates has stepped forward and actually put preventing sexual violence into his campaign. It is a significant part of his platform, and as far as we know in the research we've done, that this is the first time in Louisville's history that preventing sexual violence, preventing gender-based violence has been explicitly stated as a campaign platform for any of our mayors or any of our city-wide offices. So the conversation has certainly spread. We're working really hard to make sure the conversation isn't just a conversation, but it actually has some feet on the ground in terms of where are we going to go with this in terms of actually moving towards prevention. And again, kind of as the conversation is going, what is the role of men in that prevention effort? That's a quick thumbnail sketch. I probably left out a lot of details, but I'm much more interested in the conversation and the dialogue than listen to my own self. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and hand it over to Laxman.
That's terrific. Thanks, Russ. Laxman, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Russ. That was amazing. Yeah, I think what I'll be talking about is what I have been part of several discussions in various regions, including in the DC area in particular, and share my experiences of what's the conversations going on, and also what we are doing from Men Engaged Global Alliance in order to help reflect on what does it mean for us as an organization, as a network as well, of where we stand in terms of how do we respond to this situation in a very systematic and systemic approach to understanding and uprooting this problem. So as I said, my name is Laxman. I work at the Global Secretariat of Men Engaged, and I originally come from Nepal, and I have been part of Men Engaged since the foundation of it, and have been part of creating a Men Engaged network in Nepal, as well as coordinating the regional network in South Asia for 5 years. Have been part of Men Engaged Europe for a while I was in Sweden, so I was lucky to work with friends like Virar and organizations. And so I think in general, the response to Me Too has been very diverse among various sectors and various groups of boys and men globally, as well as what I can see here in Washington, DC area. In response, there has been a huge realization among boys and men that it's a problem, and that they have been ignoring this for a while. So it sort of was a reflection that somebody in one of the discussions was saying that it's not that women have not been talking about this. Women have been, as Ross said, it's normal for women and girls out there, but actually it was so normal for boys and men out there that they weren't seeing it as a problem. They were just there, they were simply ignoring the voices of women and girls who have been raising their voices. But I think what Me Too really helped to amplify those voices which were there in a much more broad aspect, to bring the structural matters and the realization that just having policy framework would not help. It's about the culture that we are, and the culture where men and boys are brought up in this type of system where things are normalized in a particular way. And the behaviors and attitudes are normalized in those processes. And in terms of who have really got into this debate are the people who have already been involved somehow or have heard some of about this initiative. But largely, again, there is a huge group which is still not even touched with this discourse. By that, what I mean was the people who are leading the organizations, the institutions are still not yet in the discourse. But again, it varies from country to country. For example, Vidar, as in Sweden, it has really made an outcry there, and people are really raising their ears. But in countries, for example, in Africa, for example, in South Asia, or even in the DC area that I'm observing, a lot of men tend to not still engage in this. And there is still a space whereby we have not been able to reach out to this unapproached or unapproachable group of men and boys. And still a lot of discussions are happening within the feminist groups. That includes very minority number of men. If I divide that by the age range, the more people who are attracted towards these discussions and are willing to do something are the younger people. So young generations are really up, and I can say that from my own experiences is I have taken this as an opportunity to engage with my own son at home and talk about consent. And thanks to Humberto, he wrote an amazing blog about how he is doing it with his own son. Ross wrote about it few months back as well. But I think some of us who are in these spaces know and have been working, we have been able to take it up within our own spaces in a much more constructive and systemic manner. But whereas as the age grows up, the people around, sort of late, over around the age of, or around mid 30s or so, it's a very mixed reaction. Some people or some men and boys have sort of been distancing themselves from this discourse, saying that this is not who I am. I do not belong to that group who does it. It's the bad guys who do it versus I'm good guy. So the discourse around who is bad and who is good has been very challenging as such, because a lot of men and boys do not see themselves as part of the larger systematic problem. And that's something we need to really keep in mind as well as we move on. And then a lot of discourses also, as Ross was mentioning, remains very limited to what an individual does or what an individual act has been. But rather than connecting that with a problem around the systems of sexism, systems of impunity, the systems of patriarchy that is fostering and socializing children and young people into this system. So also the challenge with regards to defining good versus, or dichotomizing good versus bad is a major barrier. And then if you look at some of the leadership and the corporate sector, I don't know if many of you have or are aware of the initiative called Mental Health that was initiated by an organization called Lean In. So there are these small initiatives taken up by this large corporate sector on calling out men in leader or men in power positions to take some concrete actions. But the challenge we are facing there is that those actions are not rooted in feminist discourse. So they are taking it as, some of us know and are critical of initiatives like He4C, which do not embed in the accountable accountability framework when it comes to men and boys taking those spaces. And last point I would also stop, and so that we can engage in more discussions, is about the discussions that are taking place and how they are taking place. Vidar mentioned about creating safe space for boys and men, which is absolutely needed, but also that sort of movement, especially in South Asia, the way it is moving up, is that then boys and men are then taking leadership or taking up this more space, saying that it is our responsibility to do something, while marginalizing women rights organizations and activists who have been in the field, on the street for a while. So there has been a tensions on that side as well. And then in terms of the global response by states, has been very, very extremely problematic in various parts of the world. So I would stop there as well and probably allow time for engagement.
Well, thank you, Laxman. That was a terrific compilation of lots of ideas. And I really, and there is much in this, and it can go quite deep. Thank you, Russ, for talking about specific work in Louisville. I'd like to start facilitating this by first seeing if there's some questions anyone in the audience has for either Russ or Laxman to clarify something that they have said. Please feel free. I see in chat that Russ has posted Humberto's blog that Laxman referred to. But if anyone would like to unmute yourself and ask a question, that would be a great place to start in the conversation here. Think about what you've heard and what's on your mind. And if you don't have a microphone, I know several people don't, please put it in chat and Toby or I will notice it. I'm not sure that everyone, I'm remembering my chat went down, so I don't have the early chat or introductions, but I have the later ones. So, questions? And comments, let's go to comments. I mean to.
Criticisms?
Criticisms. Go for it.
I have a question.
Sure, Chuck.
Why is Sweden specifically more active than other parts of the country? Why are men in Sweden more active than in other parts of the country?
You mean the world?
Excuse me. Yes, thank you. The world. What's going on in Sweden to make that happen?
Well, I think we had we've been talking, there was a campaign a couple of years ago in Sweden where there was a public discussion around sort of sexual consent, and so I think the ground was what is it? I don't know the expression in English, but it was kind of, we discussed these questions in public before, so I think that was one of the reasons. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you, Vidar, have
Is there more structural respect and systemic respect, like Laxman is referring to, in Sweden than in other parts of the world?
I think.
Is that you there?
But one. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. I wasn't just...
One reflection is that women do have there is a certain amount of gender equality and power to women, so they have more of a platform to really act. And there was really some men that were really moved down from high positions, which gave a lot of impact that this is for real. And the women, I don't know. Do you know, Henrik, how many? I think it's more than 150 different Me Too campaigns coming from all sectors in Sweden, and they were very powerful and very well organized and coordinated as well. So that's really made a big impact on everybody. And of course, we also have resistance from men and also some women. But it seems like also, I don't know, all the parental leave for men and all these different things, I think, have prepared the ground for men, more men to be more aware or listening or ready. Even if many of the 1,000 men that became new members were really new into these questions, it was not just all the feminist men who were already out there, but many of them were totally new to this as well. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the questions fully, but a little reflection.
Thanks for trying.
Opportunity.
Henrik, you put your hand up. Do you want to add a little more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that made the Me Too movement so big in Sweden was that, as Vidar mentioned, so we had these kind of work-related, very specific work-related Me Too calls, if you say. So we had the doctors, the women doctors, and we had the women lawyers, and the opera singers, and there was so many specifics. And there was they also organized themselves together. So they very strategically released these sort of big calls, or what's the word for it? So we had them during several months. So they really used immediate attention to get lots of they got lots of publicity, and I think that also engaged more men because we had it in the media for such a long time.
That's great. I want to remind everyone that we're recording, just so we don't forget. We'll have this posted after our session in a week or so. So that's terrific. Other experiences and questions. Love to hear additional experiences. Not only the experiences that you are happy and excited about, but the things that are frustrating, perhaps. Both sides. What are your experiences with response to Me Too? What we're here to talk about.
And feel free to chime in and unmute yourself, or you can hit the raise hand feature. If you're nervous, you'll talk over someone and we can call on people. Or add it into the chat if that's your...
Put it in chat if you're able to. If you don't have a mic and you have chat.
While we're on that, can I ask a question, Craig? Does that feel okay?
Sure.
I'm curious from folks who have been around for a minute, or anyone, I guess, really, thinking about accountability and the way that our culture currently at least threatens to respond to harm that is caused is with disposing of someone, right? You did something bad, now Matt Lauer, you're fired, get away from everything, right? Henry Weinstein, get out of here. Aziz Ansari, you can't have a show anymore. And I'm wondering where y'all see the benefit in a threat like that versus the harm that's caused in stopping people from stepping up. Right now, I don't feel a big incentive to come out and say, hey, I've done a thing, because now I'm scared of being disposed of as well. And where do y'all see the movement or the work around, whether it's transformative justice as a term or just something else that allows people a space to publicly name that they have something to be accountable for and work through without that fear? Or is that fear necessary and beneficial?
So Russ or Laxman, do either one of you want to try that one?
Go ahead, Russ.
I'll chime in. I guess from my lens, I think the heavy reliance on the criminal legal perspective has created a conflation between accountability and punishment. And I think those are two very different concepts. I think those are two different experiences and processes. punishment can be a part of an accountability process, but it isn't that. And I think part of what concerns me about that reaction of going directly to punishment is it tends to leave us lacking on what to do with those gray area behaviors that may not warrant a punitive response. But what do we do about it then? So I would like for us to have a richer conversation about what does accountability and amends making look like? Going back to what Chuck and Laxman have both talked about, what are the structures that support men's accountability and amends making? We always have punishment as an option. There are always going to be situations that require and deserve punishment. As a parent of an 8-year-old, that's something that we do. And how does that help folks move and learn and grow? So I would like to see a much more rich and nuanced understanding of accountability and amends making. So
thanks so much, Russ.
Yeah. No, I think just building on that, it's also not only the fear among men who know they have done some mistakes, but also the fear that, the study that Lean based their Mentor Her campaign articulates that the 60% of the corporate leaders feel uncomfortable now mentoring any female colleagues because of the discomfortness around Me Too and what it has raised out. So yeah, it's not very simple in terms of who is responding and who is coming out or not. But I think as Russ and others probably mentioned, it has to do with whether, it's a process of understanding, given the normalization that we were talking about, it's a process of raising awareness as a self. And I think I always take an example of, probably in Sweden, to take an example of, prohibiting and eliminating corporal punishment, the use of physical and humiliating punishment against children. As a good example is only criminal justice system would not work in order to eliminate this as the problem as such and the root causes of it. It does have to be embedded in this measure of looking at the criminal justice system, but also the existing domestic laws in place, how those laws come to interplay when it comes to the criminal justice system, but also how do we use those laws as educative measures so that, just saying and raising awareness will not end the problem because we are normalized or sort of shaped to behave in a particular manner and we are comfortable in continuing behaving like that. So anything that puts us in a discomfort or uncomfortable position is something we will always challenge with, and we would always want not to go into that direction. And that's the point around accountability. When it comes to accountability in the work we do with boys and men, it's a very uncomfortable discussion. We have to be acknowledging the bad behaviors of individual as us. It's a very in-depth reflection that we all have to go through. And it's not very clear dichotomy in terms of what are, whether some of my behaviors should be handled through criminal justice system or some of my realizations that I have gone through because of certain behavior I have done in the past. And that needs to be judged and handled very carefully. And the way that I would consider doing it is also to do together with women's rights organizations who have expertise on dealing and handling these issues. And I think for me, that is the fine line to go with rather than group of men trying to, sort of come with solutions directly without necessarily involving with the group of women's rights organizations who have been dealing with this. And accountability is something that needs to be defined at the very contextual level and what that means in that particular context. So yeah, it's a bit of complex process on accountability in that sense. But I think if we are looking at systems dismantling approach or addressing systems approach, then we have to, so at some point in time, take this fine line and not be afraid of putting away some men who have done certain unhealthy, or who have certain unhealthy behaviors and attitudes. So I think it's calling out as well. And it's so I was reading an article yesterday, it's not about good men saying I have not done that, but also these good men, so-called, should step up to call out to other men who have been doing this unhealthy, or who have unhealthy attitude and behavior. So it's not enough saying I'm not in that group, but also we need to push men to take concrete actions towards holding others to account.
Sure. Thanks, Lakshman.
The other thing that occurs to me, Lakshman, as you're talking, and I'm reading the text chat and comments from Chuck and Ross, and part of what I'm going back, Lakshman, to your point around the systemic and the structural pieces is to what degree, and this is, I don't have it answered in my own head, but how does our focus on holding individual men accountable, punishing individual men for their behavior, divert us from the structural problems of sexism and how sexual harassment is built into the structure, not just individual behaviors? I'm reflecting right now in the U.S. on the whole gun violence conversation that has exploded after Parkland in Florida, that largely ignores that the vast majority of gun violence, or the vast majority of police violence, is also gun violence, and that we have heard from the Black Lives Matter movement. And police perpetrators of gun violence are not part of the normative conversation around ending gun violence, because the focus is on individuals who take their guns into schools and shoot and shoot children, not police officers who shoot grown Black men. And so how do we make sure in this conversation of accountability and punishment that we both hold individuals accountable, but also hold space for the conversation around how do we hold structures accountable and systems accountable? And I don't know, part of my gap in understanding is how do we punish structures? Holding accountable structures, I have a framework for understanding, but punishing structures, I don't know how to do.
Or use the word change. Sure. So we have two hands up. Chuck and Tom both have your hands up. Do either of you want to add in something right now? Chuck or?
Well, I have been very inspired after doing this work for since 1983. I've been very pleased by the consequences that men have finally been experiencing because of the sexual harassment and assault. And I think there should be more, and it should be consistent. And I think it's beginning of the process of change. And so the pushback is real. We've been talking about how normal this is. Sexual exploitation and objectification of women is fun. It provides us, it's functional. The male privilege that we have because of sexist oppression, I don't have to compete in the workplace. And because of racist oppression, I, as a white man, don't have to compete in the workplace in the same way if it was really equal. So I get the next advancement, but if it was equal, I wouldn't, right? And that's, from very simple privileges to very consequential privileges like that. So I think the consequences are critical. And at the same time, I totally agree with what's been said about what is the structure that's supporting this normalized behavior, that it can't be just one, it just can't be the consequences. That's intervention. And it has to be coupled with primary prevention. How do we stop it before it starts? So that's where I'm thinking. But I've been very, very hopeful. To me, the Me Too movement has shown a change, a cultural change. And now it's, I think, up to us in partnership with women to keep that ball rolling. So that's my comments on it.
Thank you, Chuck. I'll lower your hand. Tom, do you want to chime in? I'll unmute you.
I guess just to add a very quick case study I think that I've shared recently that seems very relevant is that when I was speaking to a restorative justice researcher and practitioner in the US, he said he read out Louis C.K.'s apology and asked the group as to whether or not they saw this as taking accountability and responsibility. And he said to stand on a line on the spectrum on the right-hand side is, yes, he's done a good job. And the left-hand side is, no, I'm in disagreement. He did not take on responsibility. And he said it was a very even spread across the room, and the whole group was dispersed across that line very evenly. So that was just an illustration of the really individualized nature of accountability that he saw in a very real sense, in that accountability, you know, is one of those terms. It's one of those words. It's like justice. It has such an individualized loading to it. So I guess I'd be really interested to speak to yourself, Russ, or Vida, and some of these men who are holding these groups and these focus groups, as to whether or not a discussion around accountability is you know, a big part of the Me Too conversation at the moment too, because it feels like we're tiptoeing into it myself with other men, that is a critical part of having the conversation in Australia. So I just wanted to share that anecdote, I guess.
Thanks, Tom. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Sure. Let's hear more about what you've heard talked about in discussion groups. Humberto, is that your hand up? No. You want to say something?
Yeah, I do. Just wanted to also share that when it comes to accountability, we also need to accept that a lot of survivors tried to hold their abusers accountable before they went public, and they made tremendous efforts to get those men to acknowledge the harm and the hurt that they committed, and that in many cases the survivors had no choice but to go public with their stories because they were getting no justice. And I think we need to remember that. And I think when it comes to accountability and defining that, I think the voices of survivors need to be front and center in determining what accountability and what justice means like for them. And I think we need to take their cues on that as well. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that a lot of men lost their jobs because companies and organizations have clear policies around those kinds of behaviors. And you know, let's not blame the survivors. It is ultimately, it's the responsibility of those who committed the harm, and it is the responsibility of their employers and the organizations that they're affiliated with to carry out whatever is in their policies, and good for them for having strong zero tolerance policies around these behaviors. Having said all of this, I do agree that we need to look at other models of you know, seeking justice, but I think that needs to be done in very close partnership with survivors and their advocating organizations.
Thanks, Humberto. Good points. So response or other experiences. Alan, I see you on the screen. We haven't said hello to you yet. You want to share something?
Sorry I'm late. I was in Cedar Rapids and just got back into town. I knew I was going to miss the first part of this conversation. I was just mindful of a session we did in one of our classrooms here at UNI at the university last week, and one of the young men spoke out against just the fictitiousness, if you will, of rape culture and the whole Me Too being just a total scam, if you will. And I could hear the gasp of other students in the room as we were discussing. So here, you know, it's all ages. I mean, there's work to be done everywhere for sure. But the accountability piece, and so in that moment with that young man, who, you know, so he took it, he shared it out loud. He went after, he spoke his thoughts related to this whole broad discussion around sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape culture, and I turned it over to his classmates, and there was you know, they shared some stories and they shared some examples. They didn't jump down his throat, which probably would have just emphasized more of in his mind their radicalism. And so I think he was a little bit disarmed, I think, by the nature and how he was approached by his peers, which I thought was probably couldn't have been could not have happened in a better environment, you know, with his own peers. So, but I agree, accountability piece, Russ, that you mentioned, and compared to you talking about, and Tom as well, is very, very relevant and important.
Sure. It's a comment I want to make in general. When Me Too first came out, Harvey Weinstein was being confronted, and the response was the breathtaking aspect of quickly bringing firing and removing leaders from these organizations, but particularly the entertainment industry. And then it went on to other industries. That the breathtaking nature of the responses I felt was new. I think I'm sort of sharing that with you, Chuck, in that sense that that something has changed in the last 10 years to come to the point where this new outcry by survivors, male and female, more female than male, to say that this is really still going on and it's horrible. It's a horrible aspect to living, and it needs to stop. And that's been said over. I remember hearing that from folks many, many, many years ago. 40 years ago, that was the statement. How is it any different now? What's changed? So the work of everyone here in the room, I think, has credited. I can credit all of us with some progress made. The women's movement, the men's pro-feminist movement. There's progress made, that there's moved into policy, that as the social norm has changed, that this can't stand any longer. So I just want to say that, that's a hopeful reality, and that I'm hoping that everyone can take that in and then help move it forward. The men who are, I guess, Laxman, you mentioned, the executives who are afraid to mentor, the male executives who are afraid to mentor women because they might get in trouble. That's good. You know, they got to think about what they're doing. So it's a reason to celebrate an aspect of this reality, and that it brings some men into the room for a conversation, a new kind of conversation, I think is really valuable. I just want to make that point. So Laxman, get your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so no, I think, that is the point. It's not about, rather it's all about how we understand accountability in a particular context. Tom, your case is very typical as well in this sense is, and then, for the fact that we realize the men who have been accused have stepped down from their positions, but then have not legally been prosecuted. So which is a fact, and that's the flaw, and that's the reason why some of the transformations that we talk about at the systems level do not work, is because of the lack of proper implementation and the willingness of those who are supposed to be implement those properly in line that provides justice and maintains human rights and dignity. So I think, our typical case also is from the deputy director of UNICEF who stepped down, who used to work with Save the Children, and he resigned, but then nothing has really have happened in back his home in UK. So what exactly are we talking about? Are we saying these men taking these steps whereby, or these privileged men, I would rather say, taking step of resigning from their positions, but then not taking further steps? So are we just looking at these men stepping down only, or are we talking about these men being held accountable to have gone through a certain process, whether it be a criminal justice process, whether it be an awareness or a reflection process? And that's where the accountability comes in. We, as group of men, have not been able to help these men and go and talk with these men who have stepped out, and we thought that's enough, but actually these are getting into other spaces, continuing with the same behavior and getting out of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where accountability becomes very, very important for us folks, male identified or people who are working with engaging boys and men work, is where are we in this field in terms of holding these men to account? And that's where I think for me, accountability lies, is are we listening, for example, a big example that I'm frightening myself as a father of a young child of 10 years is what's happening with Trump. You know, are we listening to the actress who come out recently and what she's saying? Are we hearing her voice, or are we just, you know, being ruffled around all the nuances or this big fuss that Trump keeps on raising about Russia or other? But actually, you know, even though there is huge media coverage, and that's where I think I become slightly unhappy. Even if there is a huge, unlike Sweden, you know, where there is a huge uprise of media is, and that really works out with the general public. But in other part of the world, including the US, it doesn't apparently work. It's even if it's out there, you know, media has been covering it very well, but there is lack of sense of accountability of those institutions and leaders who should really step up to hold these individual men to account. So I think that's where, and that's the complexity around accountability. And are we listening to, and I think, you know, that's where, you know, Humberto, I absolutely agree. Are we agreeing to first accept and believe what women are saying out there? I think that is the primary step. Do we, as individuals who are in this field, do we accept to say that we trust you? We believe you, what you are saying. I think that's a beginning, you know.
Thank you, Laxman. So we have a hand up. I only have SVPC on your screen. Let me take your unmuted. Now you're on. Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry, it's Jamal. Like I said.
Jamal, hi, Jamal.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. So I kind of have a dual question, but since we're talking about accountability, I'm really wondering what messages of accountability are being provided, one, and then two, are we nuancing what accountability looks like when we do have discussions? Because it's one thing that accountability, like I hold very little consequence if I say, you know what, I have actually harassed someone, right? As opposed to I'm currently sexually harassing this person, right? So those are two different things. And so how do we then nuance our messaging in order to hold individuals accountable and then move toward action where behaviors change?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. Response?
Yeah, thanks. You know, that's a very interesting question. And again, I always go back to what does it entail to change behavior? And it's not, there is no simple answer to it either. And which comes first, on behavior change or attitudinal change or, you know, the structural change? Probably, you know, with my own experience on working with this sector is everything have to go parallel, whichever fits in that particular context. And what the opportunities arise. And it should be a culmination of everything. We can't just say that we will focus on this, but to make it practical also, that we are focusing on a particular area, given the context, given the need at that felt need at that point in time, but that needs to be well strategized in a long term that can then connect with all these levels of socio-ecological approach if we are really looking at sustainable behavior change or the norm change or transformation that we are looking at, systemic transformation that we are looking at. Yeah, that's a short, not very clear contribution.
Thanks, Laxman. We're moving into our final 5 minutes. So I'd like to see the hands of folks who have final closing comments. I see Chuck's hand is up. And if those who are on don't have microphones want to type in the chat, we'll do our best to include those in closing comments. But what this, looking forward to thinking about theory, some theory was raised, which I think is really good, about what we think we can get done. You know, this is important. I think one is reacting to these circumstances, but then it's how do we take advantage of this to move a few needles forward, a few pieces forward? So Chuck, go ahead.
Oh, we had when you're talking about accountability and how to move beyond that, it's, as many of us have been talking about, you just mentioned Laxman, where are these men going? What do they do? We had a Senator Al Franken in Minnesota who was accused of misbehavior, significant. And before he stepped down, one of the things I was looking for from him when I think about accountability is how can he, because your actions have been suppressing women, how now to be accountable can you expand and empower women and support women's empowerment? So as a senator, would he be supporting female candidates, for instance? Would he be putting forth policy that would support gender equity and respect in the workplace and pay equity and those kinds of things? So there's some concrete things that you can do if you've made these mistakes to in fact reverse them in the future as men of privilege and how do we use our privilege and our influence to do so?
If I can jump in real quick.
Sure.
I don't want to if there's other people who have their hands up. So, Craig, I'm looking to
you. Go ahead. You go ahead. You're good.
Okay, Chuck, I wanted to respond to that, and Jamal, is that your name? I think this might also tie back to your point, one of your points, and that's this notion that just losing their job or stepping down from their position, that's an act of being accountable, and I'm not sure that is. That may be punishment, but accountability is deeper than that. You know, my making amends for doing what I did is more than saying, okay, I did something bad, let me step out of the limelight or, you know, take a smack on the hand. It's actually doing something to make those amends. Chuck, as you were suggesting around what can people do once it's not just losing a job. And I think this, again, this conflation between punishment and accountability leads us to think, okay, well, they've been accountable, he lost his job. I don't know that I don't agree that that's being accountable. Okay, he lost his job, but where's the accountability for that?
Sure, it's an excellent question to think about. Let's see, is a user who has raised their hand. Go ahead and speak up.
I don't know why my computer doesn't show my name, but
oh, it doesn't. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just, as I was listening, one of the things that I've been asked to do a fair amount of talks around here on Me Too, and like very commonly the question, right, is about like, should we be worried about men losing their jobs and why that type of piece being angry. And one of the things that we've been sharing from my program is really trying to get people thinking about, if you're angry now, and you're angry now because you think people are losing their jobs unfairly, why weren't you angry before when survivors were being mistreated in the workplace, having to leave their jobs, not being promoted, all of those pieces? And if your anger has only come forward, or your discomfort with this process, if it's only come forward now, then your understanding of the system has to be rooted in oppression and in a disbelief of survivors, and not one where you're prioritizing the needs and beliefs of survivors. And so, like, really trying to get people to lean into that thinking around, why are you upset now? Because people were losing their jobs before, and those people were survivors.
Sure.
And that idea.
Yeah. Tell us your name.
TK.
Oh, PK. Okay. Thank you very much for your comment. So I think we're time to close. It's never easy to end something midstream, but it is going on 4:30. We're going to send out an evaluation form best we can to everybody. Look for that in your email. Hope we have your comments, and we'll use that for feedback into our next coming session. So I want to thank everyone. I'll leave the chat open for a while. You all can make closing comments in the chat. I'm going to say farewell to everyone. Sound good? Thanks for everybody. Really appreciate it. Very rich, very important, very meaningful. Thank you.